Could investigators finally be closing in on a breakthrough in the disappearance of 84-year-old Nancy Guthrie? 15 days after she vanished from her Tucson home, the FBI has revealed a development that may prove critical: a glove recovered just 2 miles from her residence is now undergoing DNA testing. And according to federal authorities, it appears similar to the gloves worn by the masked man captured on surveillance video outside her home the night she was taken. If confirmed, this discovery could shift the trajectory of a case that has left a community anxious and a family desperate for answers. Nancy's disappearance began after what seemed like a perfectly ordinary evening. She had spent time at her daughter's home, enjoying dinner and games. A simple family night. Later, a relative drove her back to her own house where she lived alone nearby. But sometime in the early morning hours, something happened. By sunrise, Nancy was gone. Surveillance footage later released by investigators showed a masked individual standing on her front porch. The man appeared armed, wearing a backpack and gloves. His identity remains unknown. But now, investigators are focusing heavily on what he left behind. According to an FBI statement, deputies recovered multiple gloves scattered in areas near Nancy's neighborhood. Most were determined to belong to volunteer searchers or investigators who had discarded them during the search effort. However, one glove stood out. This particular glove was discovered in a roadside field roughly 2 miles from Nancy's home. It was packaged and immediately sent to a private forensic laboratory in Florida, the same lab routinely used by the Pima County Sheriff's Department for DNA analysis. Preliminary results have already been returned. Now, officials are awaiting final confirmation before uploading the unknown DNA profile into CODIS, the FBI's combined DNA index system. CODIS contains genetic profiles from convicted offenders, arrestees, and individuals previously processed through the federal system. If the DNA from that glove matches someone already in the database, investigators could have a name very soon, but there are still major unknowns. Authorities have emphasized that the man in the surveillance video is still considered an unknown male. The footage shows him possibly wearing nitrile gloves layered over another pair, a tactic sometimes used to avoid leaving fingerprints. Nitrile gloves are common and widely available, used for everything from cleaning to medical work. So here's the key question: does the glove found in that field simply resemble the gloves seen in the video, or is there forensic evidence that directly links it to the masked suspect? Investigators have not clarified what makes them believe the glove may be connected to the case rather than discarded trash. And notably, none of the gloves collected were found inside Nancy's home or on her property. Adding another layer of complexity, the sheriff previously stated that DNA belonging to someone other than Nancy was found inside her house. However, it remains unclear whether that DNA belongs to the masked individual, or if it could belong to someone with legitimate access, such as a gardener, pool technician, church acquaintance, or hired help. As the case enters its 3rd week, this glove could represent a glimmer of hope, or just another thread in an increasingly tangled web. And if that DNA profile hits in CODIS, investigators may finally be able to put a name to the masked figure on Nancy Guthrie's porch. But if it doesn't, that's when this case could take an even more complicated turn, because the next development may not come from DNA at all. It may come from something far more unexpected. While investigators wait on final DNA confirmation from the glove, law enforcement activity on the ground suggests they are aggressively chasing multiple leads, even as some of those leads begin to fade. Over the past several days, authorities executed a federal search warrant at a home located roughly 2 miles from Nancy Guthrie's residence. Around the same time, deputies conducted a traffic stop at a nearby fast food restaurant. Both actions drew immediate public attention, but notably, no arrests followed. That has raised an important question. What exactly caused investigators to focus on those individuals To obtain a federal search warrant, law enforcement must present a judge with probable cause, meaning they must show evidence suggesting that a specific location likely contains material connected to a crime. Search warrants are not issued lightly, so whatever investigators presented to the court had to meet a legal threshold. However, officials have not publicly disclosed what that probable cause was. A later report indicated that authorities may be leaning away from labeling the homeowner as a suspect. That doesn't mean the person is cleared, only that the investigation remains fluid. In cases like this, it's common for detectives to pursue strong leads quickly, rule them out, and move forward without public explanation. And that's exactly what appears to be happening here. Adding to the complexity, law enforcement has confirmed that at least 2 individuals have been detained and questioned since Nancy's disappearance. Yet again, no charges have been filed. From the outside, this can look chaotic, but experienced investigators know that high-profile cases generate enormous volumes of tips, especially once surveillance footage is released, and that's where things may have shifted dramatically. After the FBI released the doorbell camera footage showing the masked man outside Nancy's home, thousands of tips flooded in. In fact, reports suggest that more than 14,000 tips were submitted within days. While public assistance can be invaluable, it can also overwhelm investigative resources. Every single tip must be reviewed, assessed, and documented. That takes manpower. And in a time-sensitive case involving an elderly woman with medical concerns, time is critical. There's also debate among former investigators about whether releasing the surveillance video so early may have given the suspect an advantage. Once the footage went public, the person in that video would know law enforcement had a clear image, even if the face was covered. That knowledge could prompt someone to dispose of clothing, discard a backpack, destroy a weapon, or even leave the area entirely. In criminal investigations, sometimes the most powerful strategy is silent observation, identifying a suspect before they realize they are being watched. Now, instead of quietly narrowing their focus, authorities must work through thousands of public submissions while also responding to intense media scrutiny. At the same time, reports indicate investigators are increasingly moving away from focusing on Nancy's family members as potential suspects. Though officials have emphasized that no one is formally ruled out until an arrest is made, the current direction appears to point elsewhere. So where does that leave the investigation? DNA results are pending, search warrants have been executed, individuals have been questioned and released. Thousands of tips are being analyzed. But there is another critical element in this case that could prove just as important as forensic evidence, and it's something the masked suspect carried with him the entire time he stood on Nancy Guthrie's porch, because that backpack may hold more answers than anyone initially realized. As investigators push forward, attention has increasingly shifted to one highly visible detail from the surveillance footage: the backpack worn by the masked individual outside Nancy Guthrie's home. It wasn't just any bag. Authorities now believe the suspect was carrying a 25-liter Ozark Trail Hiker backpack, a model sold exclusively at Walmart. That detail may seem minor at first glance, but in modern investigations, retail data can become a powerful tracking tool. Large retailers like Walmart maintain detailed inventory records. They can determine when a specific product was stocked, when it was sold, and often at which register. Combined with in-store surveillance footage, that data can narrow down potential buyers significantly. If investigators can determine approximately when the backpack was purchased, based on wear, release date, or store distribution patterns, they may be able to cross-reference transaction records and video footage. From there, they could identify individuals who bought that specific model in the Tucson area, and the backpack isn't the only retail clue. Reports also suggest the suspect was wearing what appears to be an inexpensive hip holster, possibly a strategy brand model also sold at Walmart for around $10. That product is reportedly available at several Walmart stores in the Tucson region. Individually, these items may not stand out, but together they create a purchasing trail, and retail trails have played major roles in high-profile criminal cases before. Investigators frequently analyze purchase histories, surveillance footage, and payment methods to establish timelines. In some cases, suspects have unknowingly left behind digital footprints that later became key courtroom evidence. The suspect's clothing and gear may actually reveal something else too. Several former investigators who reviewed the footage have suggested that the individual does not appear to be a seasoned criminal. The gear choices seem basic, even improvised. The holster placement looked awkward, the backpack was distinctive, and the suspect remained on the porch for an extended period, reportedly around 40 minutes. That duration is significant. Professional criminals often aim to minimize exposure time. Lingering increases the chance of detection. And yet this individual remained outside the home far longer than expected. Footage from the scene also revealed something unsettling, blood droplets visible on the porch. The pattern appeared vertical, suggesting Nancy may have been standing still for several seconds while bleeding rather than being dragged quickly away. That detail has fueled speculation that this was not a swift, well-executed operation. T may have been disorganized, nervous, possibly even carried out by someone without experience. And here's why that matters. Amateurs make mistakes. They overlook cameras. They discard evidence carelessly. They panic under pressure, and as time passes, stress increases. The longer this case remains unsolved, the more likely it becomes that the person responsible could slip up again. Because even if DNA fails to produce an immediate match, and even if retail surveillance doesn't provide a name right away, pressure builds, and pressure leads to errors. Meanwhile, investigators are exploring another technological avenue that could prove just as critical as DNA or store records. It involves something inside Nancy's body, something that may still be transmitting a signal, because if that signal is detected, it could change everything about where this search is headed next. As investigators analyze gloves, backpacks, and surveillance footage, there is another piece of technology at the center of this case, one that could potentially lead directly to Nancy Guthrie, her pacemaker. According to authorities, Nancy's medical device was synced to both her iPhone and her Apple Watch. On the night she disappeared, her pacemaker reportedly disconnected from her phone at approximately 2:28 a.m. That timestamp may be one of the most critical data points in the entire investigation. Both her iPhone and Apple Watch were later found inside her home. That suggests she may have been taken without them, and without the ability to call for help. But if her pacemaker is still active, it could theoretically emit a detectable signal, and investigators are not leaving that possibility to chance. In recent days, media crews have observed helicopters flying unusually low over Nancy's neighborhood. According to reports, law enforcement is using specialized equipment known as a signal detection system, sometimes referred to as a signal sniffer. This technology is capable of detecting a range of electronic emissions, including Wi-Fi, cellular signals, radio frequencies, and potentially medical device transmissions. However, it's not as simple as scanning an entire city. For this equipment to work effectively, aircraft must fly low and slow over a defined geographic area. It requires precision and careful mapping. Investigators must narrow their search zones strategically rather than sweeping vast regions blindly. Private investigators familiar with this type of technology have explained that while it can be effective, it's not guaranteed. In previous missing person searches where similar tools were deployed, results were mixed. Sometimes the signal was located, sometimes it wasn't. But in a case involving an elderly woman with medical needs, every possible avenue must be explored. Time is not neutral here. Nancy is 84 years old. Early in the investigation, concerns were raised about her medication and whether going without it for an extended period could be life-threatening. That urgency adds emotional weight to every passing day. As the search enters its third week, hope remains, but so does reality. Law enforcement has doubled the reward for information leading to Nancy's recovery or the identification of whoever took her. The reward now stands at $100,000. Thousands of tips have already been received, especially after images of the masked suspect were widely shared online. The surveillance photos are haunting. A figure standing on a quiet porch in the early morning darkness, face covered, backpack strapped on, gloves concealing fingerprints. It's the kind of image that sticks in people's minds, and that public exposure may help, or it may complicate things further. Because once a suspect realizes their image is circulating nationwide, they may react unpredictably. They may flee, they may destroy evidence, or they may make a careless mistake. Investigators are also asking for surveillance footage from a broad radius around East Skyline Drive and North Campbell Avenue, covering dates from January 1st through early February. They are seeking anything unusual: suspicious vehicles, unfamiliar pedestrians, odd traffic patterns. Notably, authorities have requested footage from specific dates and time windows, including January 11th and the morning of January 31st, when a suspicious vehicle was reportedly spotted in the area. That suggests this investigation may stretch further back than the night Nancy disappeared. And if that's true, then someone may have been watching her long before February 1st. Which raises an even more unsettling question: was this a random act, or something carefully planned over time? Because if investigators confirm surveillance or pre-incident activity, this case could shift from impulsive crime to deliberate targeting. As the investigation moves deeper into its third week, questions are growing, not just about the suspect, but about how the case itself has unfolded. In high-stakes abduction cases, timing is everything. The first hours and days are critical. Evidence must be preserved. Scenes must remain controlled. Every detail matters. Some former federal investigators have suggested that the crime scene may have been released earlier than ideal. While local authorities have acknowledged that decisions are sometimes reassessed in hindsight, the reality is that once a scene is reopened, it can complicate evidence collection. Eventually, the FBI stepped in with its specialized evidence response teams. These units are trained specifically for complex forensic processing, from digital recovery to microscopic trace analysis. Reports indicate they were able to retrieve additional surveillance data from cloud servers after initially missing. Footage was thought to be unrecoverable. That recovery ultimately led to the public release of the now infamous porch video. But that decision has sparked debate. Releasing surveillance footage can be a powerful tool. It invites the public to help identify a suspect. It generates tips. It increases awareness. But it also carries risk. Once the video was made public, investigators were flooded with information, reportedly more than 14,000 tips within days. Every tip had to be logged, reviewed, and evaluated. That requires personnel, time, and focus. And when thousands of leads pour in at once, it can stretch investigative resources thin. There's also the strategic concern. By releasing the footage, authorities effectively alerted the suspect that they were captured on camera. From that moment forward, the person in the video would know law enforcement had visual evidence, even if the face was obscured. That awareness could prompt immediate action: disposing of clothing, destroying a backpack, discarding a firearm, or even leaving the state. In criminal investigations, sometimes the strongest advantage is silence. Observing quietly, identifying patterns, allowing a suspect to behave naturally, unaware they are being watched. But once the footage went public, that dynamic shifted. At the same time, law enforcement has detained and questioned multiple individuals based on incoming tips. While no Arrests have been made. That does not necessarily signal failure. Detaining and releasing individuals is part of narrowing the field. It eliminates possibilities and sharpens focus. Still, public speculation has intensified. The longer the case goes without an arrest, the louder the outside noise becomes. Social media theories multiply. Armchair detectives analyze every frame of video. Every law enforcement action or inaction is scrutinized. Meanwhile, investigators continue to piece together what the surveillance footage suggests. The masked individual remained outside Nancy's home for an extended period, far longer than a professional criminal typically would. The suspect's clothing choices were distinctive. The holster placement appeared awkward. The backpack was noticeable. Taken together, many experts believe this does not resemble the work of an experienced kidnapping crew. Instead, it looks like someone inexperienced, possibly acting alone, possibly improvising. And if that's true, it may explain something critical. Amateurs don't just make one mistake, they make several. And as pressure builds, from media attention, public tips, and intensified investigative tactics, the likelihood of another error increases, because even the most careful amateur can only withstand so much scrutiny before slipping. And investigators may not need a dramatic breakthrough. They may just need one small misstep, because if the person responsible makes even one careless move, one transaction, one conversation, one digital trace, this entire case could turn overnight. More than 2 weeks have passed since Nancy Guthrie vanished. For her family, every hour feels heavier than the last. For investigators, the clock has not stopped ticking. And for the person responsible, if they are still out there, the pressure is mounting. Nancy was 84 years old, a mother, a grandmother, a woman who followed a familiar routine, dinner with family, a short drive home, a quiet night ahead. Nothing about that evening suggested it would end in a nationwide search. And yet here we are. Authorities now believe key items worn by the masked suspect, including the backpack and face covering, were likely purchased at local Walmart stores. That narrows the field. Retail surveillance footage, transaction logs, and inventory tracking could provide investigators with a clearer picture of who bought those items and when. At the same time, forensic teams are waiting on final confirmation regarding the glove, found 2 miles from Nancy's home. If the DNA profile is uploaded into CODIS and produces a match, investigators could move quickly. But if it doesn't, the case does not stop. Law enforcement officials have emphasized that thousands of tips are still being processed. Surveillance footage from surrounding neighborhoods is being reviewed. Digital forensic teams are analyzing device data. Specialized units are scanning defined areas in hopes of detecting Nancy's pacemaker signal. And the reward now stands at $100,000. Public pleas have also intensified. Nancy's daughter has delivered an emotional message directly to whoever may be holding her mother. It's not too late to do the right thing. Those words carry weight, because in cases like this, there are typically only a few possibilities. Either someone talks, or someone slips. Criminal investigations often don't unravel because of one dramatic discovery. Instead, they break open because of small, seemingly insignificant mistakes. A receipt that wasn't destroyed, a backpack tossed where it could be recovered, a phone call overheard, a nervous comment made to the wrong person, a familiar face recognized from a surveillance still. In many cases, it's not law enforcement making the final move. It's the suspect making the final mistake, and experts increasingly believe that the individual seen in the porch footage did not behave like a seasoned professional. The extended time at the home, the visible gear, the awkward movements. It all suggests inexperience. Inexperience leads to pressure. Pressure leads to errors. Errors lead to arrests. Still, the hardest truth remains this: time matters. Investigators have publicly stated they are committed to finding Nancy, whether it takes weeks, months, or longer. They have not ruled anyone out officially. They continue to follow every credible lead, but beyond the investigative strategy and forensic science is a family waiting for resolution. Somewhere in this case is the detail that changes everything. It might be in a lab result, it might be in a store camera, it might be in a backyard security system, or it might be inside the mind of the person who knows exactly what happened that night. And when that final piece surfaces, whether through DNA, digital evidence, or one critical mistake, this case will shift instantly. Until then, the search continues, because someone out there knows something, and when they decide to speak, or when the suspect makes that one unavoidable error, that's when the truth about what happened to Nancy Guthrie will finally come to light.